Monument Hill and Kreische Brewery State Historic Sites. 2 historic sites in one, each with its own unique history, yet woven together in their significance to the history of Texas.
Monument Hill and Kreische Brewery is a 40-acre site that sits on a 200-foot bluff that overlooks the Colorado River and the city of LaGrange.
The natural diversity of the state and the amazing view, interconnected with the history, makes this a hidden jewel of the great state of Texas. Monument Hill is the final resting place of the remains of 52 Texas heroes who fought and died in 2 separate conflicts with the Mexican Army during Texas's struggle to remain a free and independent republic. 36 of these men died in the Dawson Massacre outside the Battle of Salado Creek near San Antonio on September 18, 1842. The other 16 men are the Texans that drew the Black Beans of Death on the Muir expedition in Mexico in March of 1843. Their remains were later buried together here in a large crypt.
In 1842, 6 years after Texas declared independence from Mexico, the fall of the Alamo, and Texas' decisive victory at the Battle of San Jacinto, Mexico turns its attention back to reclaiming Texas. The Mexican Army invaded San Antonio in February of 1842, and then again in September of the same year.
News of this last attack and pleas for help quickly spread across the countryside, reaching LaGrange. Underneath the muster oak tree on the county courthouse square, local men gathered together to join in the impending battle. There, they elected Nicholas Dawson as their captain. Dawson's group began their ride toward Salado Creek, just northeast of San Antonio, where along the way the group recruited more men. By the time Dawson neared Salado Creek, he was followed by 53 other soldiers, most of which were from Fayette County. Dawson's group was outnumbered when they were met with cannon fire and fierce fighting. On September 18th, 36 Texans, including Nicholas Dawson, were killed in what was now known as the Dawson Massacre. Their bodies were buried at the battlefield on the next day.
Of Dawson's men, 3 escaped and 15 were taken prisoners. The Dawson prisoners, along with the prisoners taken in San Antonio, began their long march out of Texas and into the prisons in southern Mexico.
News of the Mexican invasion from San Antonio and of the Dawson Massacre infuriated the citizens of Texas. Sam Houston ordered an expedition to pursue and repel the Mexican army out of Texas. On Christmas Day, 1842, the Texans were in a fierce battle in the Mexican town of Muir. After inflicting several casualties to the Mexican force, the Texans were convinced to surrender. They laid down their weapons and were taken prisoners of war.
From Muir, the Texas prisoners were forced to march south down to San Carlos de Perote prison in southern Mexico.
Not only were the Texans mistreated and fed poorly, but they also believed that they were supposed to remain in northern Mexico. The Texans soon realized that escape was their only hope to return home.
On February 11, 1843, at Hacienda Salado, under the direction of Captain Ewan Cameron, 188 of these Texas prisoners escaped. Within the next few days and weeks, 176 of these men were either recaptured or had surrendered to their pursuers.
The escape attempt enraged General Santa Anna. As punishment, he ordered 1 of every 10 of these men to be executed. To determine who would be executed, 159 white beans and 17 black beans were placed in an earthen jar.
They were taken back to Hacienda Salado to await their punishment. Of the remaining men, 7 died in the mountains, and 5 were actually able to make it back to Texas alive.
The Texas soldiers were forced to draw for their lives.
If a black bean was drawn, that prisoner would be executed that evening. If a white bean was drawn, the prisoner's life would be spared. However, they were kept as prisoners.
On March 25, 1843, the death lottery was carried out. This was later known to be called the Black Bean episode. Of those who drew black beans, only 1 was an officer, Captain William Eastland, who was from LaGrange. Later that same evening, those who draw black beans were brought in front of the firing squad, and the execution order was carried out. On the following morning, when the Mexicans came to bury the executed prisoners, the body of James L. Shepard, a youth about 17 years old, was missing.
James Shepard faked his death. He had only been wounded. He escaped during the middle of the night and made it all the way up to Saltillo. The next morning, the 16 dead were buried outside the hacienda while a search party was sent to find Shepard. 3 days later, after making his way to Saltillo, Shepard was found and was shot in the street and was buried there where he was shot.
The morning following the execution of those who drew the black beans of death, the remaining Texas prisoners left Hacienda Salado on their long march towards Perote Prison. Along the way, they joined the small band of prisoners taken from San Antonio and Dawson's group. Over the next several months of imprisonment, numerous men escaped and several more died. A large group was forced to help build roads, while others were forced to work in prison workshops. Some were able to secure their release and were allowed to go free. On September 16, 1844, Santa Anna ordered the release of all remaining Texas prisoners, including the 121 remaining mere prisoners.
During the Mexican-American War, White Bean survivors, including Captain John Dusenberry, now fighting on the side of the American Army, were near Hacienda Salado. Dusenberry and other Texans went to Hacienda Salado and reclaimed the remains of the 16 soldiers.
Major Walter P. Lane, Dusenberry's commanding officer, gave Dusenberry permission to return these men's remains to Texas.
In June of 1848, Dusenberry brought the remains to LaGrange, the home of Captain William Eastland, the only officer to draw a black bean. Following the arrival of these remains, a public meeting was held where suitable arrangements for the internment and the executed mere prisoners were adopted. It was also decided that the remains of Captain Dawson and his men were to be obtained from San Antonio and interred with the remains of the mere men.
On September 18, 1848, on the 6th anniversary of the Dawson Massacre, the remains of these 52 Texas soldiers were reburied here in a vault on the bluff that overlooks the Colorado River, on property that was owned by George Carl Rourke.
After several years of neglectful care, the tomb was falling into great disrepair. The state acquired the tomb area in 1907, and in 1933 a new granite vault was constructed to enclose the old vault. On September 18, 1933, the new vault was dedicated. In 1936, Texas' centennial celebration year, here on what had already become known as Monument Hill, a 48-foot tall monument was erected in the honor of the Dawson and Muir men. In January 1849, 5 months following the reinternment of the Texas soldiers, Heinrich Kreische, a German immigrant, bought this property on the bluff overlooking LaGrange. He was a hard-working, ingenious stonemason who later built and operated one of the first commercial breweries in Texas.
Heinrich immigrated from Saxony, Germany with his brother and arrived in Galveston in December 1846. Sometime in 1847, Heinrich moved to Fayette County and began his career as a stonemason. We believe that in September 1848, Heinrich was a stonemason who built the first vault in which these Texans are buried. In January 1849, Heinrich bought this property here on the bluff from Mr. Wilrick.
In 1853, Kreische secured a bid with Fayette County to build the second county jail. Later, in 1855, he was awarded the bid to build the third Fayette County courthouse, both of which are no longer standing. Sometime around 1855, Kreische began building his home. After securing the bid for the courthouse, Kreische married his wife Josepha Appelt. Josepha had immigrated from Austria in 1853. After the Kreisches were married, they lived in their modest one-bedroom home here on the bluff. Their house, now 3 stories, was constructed of sandstone quarried from below the bluff and is built into the side of a hill. Heinrich and Josepha had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters, none of whom ever married or had children of their own. Sometime in the early 1860s, during the time of the Civil War, Kreische began building a stone brewery in the ravine below his home. He changed his major profession from that of a stonemason to a brewmaster. His brewery became one of the first commercial breweries in Texas.
Kreische's brewery was an ingeniously built structure. He built the brewery in the bottom of a spring-fed ravine, which helped provide fresh water to the brewery and keep his brewery cool. An underground tunnel and ventilation shafts helped keep his brewery cool and help him brew a dark lager beer called Kreische's Bluff Beer. Kreische sold his beer inside his brewery at a beer hall. He also had a beer hall in LaGrange and also sold it to several saloons in the local area. By 1879, Kreische's Brewery was the third largest beer-producing brewery in the state of Texas.
During the 1870s, a wooden dance pavilion was constructed here on the bluff, which became a major social center for the local community. The Kreisches hosted many picnics, dances, traditional German events, and religious celebrations here at the pavilion. One of the most popular events held here was a shooting competition at the Schützenverein, or the shooting club.
Kreische sold his beer to his guests at these events and festivities. When he was ready to entertain his guests, he'd raise a banner with a traditional German phrase that said "frisch auf," or freshen up.
After many years of use, the pavilion was closed and taken down in the early 1930s.
By 1880, two of the Kreische sons were managing the brewery, while Heinrich had returned to his previous profession of that of a stonemason. In March 1882, Heinrich died of a work-related accident, leaving the operation of the brewery solely to the family. In 1884, the modernization of the brewing industry, along with Heinrich's death, spelled the doom of the Kreische Brewery.
The brewery was abandoned and fell into disrepair. Although it was in poor condition, the brewery was still a social center for the local community. Following the closure of the brewery, many locals still came to the site to have picnics and explore the once bustling business. Over the next several decades, the building fell into ruins. What remains today is only a small portion of Kreische's hard work, ingenuity, and enterprise. By the early 1940s, the local community had faded into the history books along with the Kreische Brewery.
By the late 1940s, only two of the Kreische children were still living. In 1950, Franklin and Julia Kreische deeded the property to the Holy Rosary Catholic Church in Hosting. Franklin died in 1950 and Julia passed away in 1952.
In 1956, the citizens of Fayette County purchased a small portion of the Kreische property from the church and donated it to the state for the purposes of developing Monument Hill State Park.
In 1964, the church sold the property to a development company called the Frischhoff Corporation. In 1977, the Frischhoff Corporation sold the property, including the brewery, to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department.
Following a few years of development, stabilization, and preservation, the two sites were opened as one park. The Monument Hill and Kreische Brewery State Historic Sites stand as testimonies to the sacrifice and hard work that it took to make Texas what it is today.
If it wasn't for these soldiers who gave their lives to help keep Texas free and independent from Mexico, then thousands of German and European immigrants would never have been able to settle here and prosper in the New World.
The influence of these immigrants, including that of the Kreisches, has added a great deal of culture to our community and has developed Texas into the great diverse state that it is today. Monument Hill and Kreische Brewery offers a variety of activities for visitors of all ages to enjoy, from hiking, picnicking, and scenic views, to a museum and guided tours in a beautiful natural setting. Visitors can also view a variety of wildlife and wildflowers. Our annual events include Texas Heroes Day in September and the Trail of Lights in December. Guests can also hold weddings, birthday parties, and family reunions at the park. School groups and tour buses are always welcomed. You can also help the park by volunteering. Join the Friends of Monument Hill and Kreische Brewery. Ask any staff member how you can help. For more information about Monument Hill or other state parks, visit our website or ask any staff member.